I started a boutique hotel company in the mid-1980s called Joie de Vivre, and I loved it. And I loved the fact that the mission statement of the company was also the name of the company, to create joy for people. I ran that company for 24 years as the CEO and founder, and we grew to 52 boutique hotels around California. I loved it till I hated it. The last 2 or 3 years running that company, I did not want to be doing it anymore. And we were going through the Great Recession, and it was a really hard time. At age 50, was no longer running the company. I was the executive chair of Joie de Vivre, ultimately what is now known as JDV, a Hyatt brand. At 52, I was asked by the 3 young founders of Airbnb, and they said, we would love to have you come in and be our in-house mentor. And so I joined, and after a few months, they called me the modern elder. And I spent 4 years full-time helping to steer the rocket ship with them, and then 3.5 years as a part-time strategic advisor, taking the company up to its IPO. It became the most valuable hospitality company in the world. While I was there, I was really curious about what midlife is about and what does it mean to be a modern elder. So I was writing a book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, down at a beachfront home that I had in Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas on the Pacific Ocean. And one day I went for a run on the beach, and I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany, which is, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? And so that's how the new category of midlife wisdom schools came about. I just deeply love the idea of taking care of people and helping them feel better. I'm Chip Conley. This is my Hospitality Daily episode.
You just came off a whirlwind tour of media. I feel like you're on every TV show, every podcast. I'm curious for you recently, just over the past month or so, of being on the road so much, were there moments where you felt hospitality as a guest at some of the places that you visited?
Yeah. Well, actually, I feel it most when I'm on campus at one of the MEA campuses, either Santa Fe or Baja. But when I was in New York, I was staying at the Andaz on Fifth Avenue, and it was snowing and it was cold, and I hadn't prepared, to be there in such cold weather that was lingering for days and days and days. And someone said, I've seen you, like the doorman said, I've been seeing you leave here sometimes without a hat on, and you've got a baseball cap, but that's not enough. So I brought this in from home. This is a knit cap, just a wool cap, and so use it while you're here this week, and then give it back to me. And so it's like, okay, that's hospitality. As Danny Meyer would say, it's when someone does something for you, not to you.
I love that. And I think that kind of doing hospitality to someone can be a trap that we fall into, because we love people, we care for them, and we want to serve them, but there's an attentiveness there that's so important.
Yeah, it's at Joie de Vivre, when I started Joie de Vivre, we used to call it the Dream Maker program. So you imagine the dream of a person who's there. You ask a few leading questions to help you understand why they're there and what would make a dream for them. And then you try to deliver on that. And it's anticipatory, which is really great, because sometimes hospitality is in reaction to someone being upset. Like, how do you deal with that? But gosh, it's just like our health. You can do preventative medicine, or you can do, surgery. And better to do the preventative medicine if you can. And that's sort of what we do with hospitality.
I appreciate you taking time to share with our community of hospitality providers. Hospitality, of course, is so important on so many levels, obviously as a concept, but even as a business and an industry. It employs so many people. It drives so much economic activity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have told your story about your work in hospitality in many places. I'll link to some of those places in the show notes. But what if we just spend a couple moments talking about this for our listeners, many of them working in hospitality? What attracted you to work and build a business in the industry of hospitality?
Yeah. So I'll do a quick intro of just my hospitality career, and then get to that question. At 26 or 25, really, I started a boutique hotel company in the mid-1980s called Joie de Vivre. Joie de Vivre means joy of life in French. I was a graduate from Stanford Business School. About 2.5 years after I graduated is when I started it. I went to work for a commercial real estate developer in San Francisco. So I had zero background in hotels, but I had a little bit of background in commercial real estate. And I loved it. And I loved the fact that the mission statement of the company was also the name of the company, to create joy for people. And ran that company for 24 years as the CEO and founder, and We grew to 52 boutique hotels around California, most of them in Northern California, most of them in the Bay Area. And you know what? I loved it till I hated it. The last 2 or 3 years running that company, I did not want to be doing it anymore. And we were going through the Great Recession, and it was a really hard time. We were launching or relaunching 15 hotels in 21 months, and right around that time. And I got to the other side of it. At age 50, was no longer running the company. I was the executive chair of Joie de Vivre, ultimately what is now known as JDV, a Hyatt brand. And I didn't know what was next. And a couple of years later, I did a few things during that time, which we could unpack if you want. But keeping the story going, at 52, I was asked by the 3 young founders of Airbnb, a business that most of us had never heard of, but it was growing fast. This was 11 years ago. And they said, we would love to have you come in and be our in-house mentor, based upon your background in hospitality and leadership and entrepreneurship, et cetera. And so I joined, and after a few months, they called me the modern elder. I said, "Oh, what are you? You're making fun of my age." And they said, "No, a modern elder is someone who is as curious as they are wise." And I appreciated that, because that was really the alchemy of what I was trying to bring to the table. Because at age 52, I'd never worked in a tech company before. And I spent 4 years full time helping to steer the rocket ship with them, and then 3.5 years as a part-time strategic advisor, taking the company up to its IPO. And as everybody knows, that IPO was a big IPO. It became the most valuable hospitality company in the world. While I was there, I was really curious about what midlife is about, and what does it mean to be a modern elder, and how are we addressing the fact that people are, by choice or necessity, staying in the workplace longer. Retirement is a word that people don't like very much anymore. And what are we going to do with these 40s, 50s, 60s and 70-year-olds who are really interested in maybe remaking themselves, reimagining, repurposing themselves? So I was writing a book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, down at a beachfront home that I had in Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas on the Pacific Ocean. And one day I went for a run on the beach, and I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany, which is, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? And so that's how the new category of midlife wisdom schools came about. And that was 6 years ago. And we now have had 4,000 alumni now from 47 countries come to Baja, to our campus. And we have a campus opening in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we can talk later about longevity travel. I think it's a form of travel that's going to start getting a lot of attention. What attracted me to this 3 stages of a career, with boutique hotelier, Airbnb disruptor, and then and modern elder, and then midlife wisdom school creator, is I just deeply love the idea of taking care of people and helping them feel better. It's so woven into my fabric, and I can't say that I grew up with that with my parents. It's not like my parents weren't good people; they were great people. But what I did find fascinating is, at a young age, when we would go on a road trip in the summer with our, back in that day, it was the station wagon with the wood panels on the sides. We'd have our AAA guide, and we'd go from motel to motel, and I would rate the motels. We'd stay there, and I'd give a little review, like a food critic. I was the hotel critic. And that was at age 12, and at 13 or 10 or 8. And so, long story short is, from an early age, and in fact, when you're like second grade, they say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I had to write an essay about it. And I said, I want to either be a TV weatherman, or a movie star, or the president of the United States, or a hotel man. I didn't say hotelier. I said a hotel man. So there you go.
Before we get into your book, Learning to Love Midlife, just a couple angles that might provide a bit of context for folks listening to this. One thing that was interesting to me is learning how you've talked about being sober from age 26 during the years of building Joie de Vivre. And so this is a contrarian take. I think people think in the hospitality business, you got to be drinking a lot. You took a different path. I'm curious. I wonder if you could speak a bit to that
for
moment.
15 years. Yeah. From 26 to 41, my company grew from 1 hotel to 21 hotels during that 15-year period. And what I realized with the first hotel, first of all, the first hotel was a pay-by-the-hour motel in San Francisco that I turned into a rock and roll hotel, and it was a party place. So, and we had a very popular restaurant called Miss Pearl's Jam House, Jamaican restaurant and reggae nightclub. So I could see, like, writing on the wall on this one, like, oh my God, I am going to get myself in so much trouble if I'm drinking every night. And I grew up in a family that, had drinking as an issue. And so I had been in Al-Anon, which is a 12-step program for people who are family members of alcoholics. And so one day I said, like, well, maybe I should stop. And I did. And I, for 15 years, didn't drink. I only started in my early 40s or at age 41, when I was sort of in a place where, like, okay, I feel comfortable having a glass of wine. But yeah, it was very helpful for me because it meant I was able to not get confused by the fact that alcohol was available to me every night if I wanted it. That's what happens in the hospitality business, and we all know people who struggled with that.
I appreciate you sharing that because you touch on themes of this in the book. It's attentiveness to your environment, yourself, what you need in that moment. And so you making that decision at that time is something I appreciate you sharing. One last question about hospitality.
Mhm.
You referenced earlier your work with Airbnb and being part of kind of building what became the world's most valuable hospitality company.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what did you learn or change your mind on about hospitality through that experience? Because it was a very new type of hospitality.
Yeah, I was Darth Vader. I went to the dark side. Just a background on that for a second. So when I joined Airbnb for the first 6 months, we didn't tell anybody. I mean, my friends knew, etc., but we didn't tell the press or anything like that because, to have a guy who's a boutique hotelier and a CEO and a pretty high profile boutique hotelier joining this company that was meant to disrupt the hotel industry um, was going to be weird. I mean, we had to be prepared for it once we got the word out. And I don't know if Brian, who I was mentoring as the CEO and co-founder, I don't know that he and I were clear in the first month how attached at the hip we had to be. Because quite frankly, once it became public that I was actually doing this, there are going to be a lot of people, some confused because at that point, a lot of hoteliers thought Airbnb was just a stupid idea, but others thinking like, uh-oh, like, let's keep an eye on Airbnb. Like, where are they going if they've hired this former CEO and boutique hotelier? So the good news is that in those first 6 months, Brian and I found a really great working relationship, and I learned as much from him as he did from me. In terms of what I learned about hospitality, I would just say a couple things. Number one is, when I joined Airbnb, I was struggling with the idea. I was in charge of all the hosts globally. I was in charge of strategy. I was in charge of a lot of things. But the thing I was most in charge of was, how do we help our hosts around the world be as good as they can be? And how can we improve quality experiences? And that was a hard one because I was like, oh, but when you have a hotel, these are your employees. But in fact, the people who are actually providing the service, other than when there's a customer service problem and we're dealing with it at the headquarters, generally we're dealing with hosts who are entrepreneurs. They're not our employees. We are not allowed to actually train them because we didn't want them to become our employees. So there was some limitations to what we technically could do in order for them to not be employees. But what I actually tapped into, which has been a big part of my success, I think, is psychology. And I've written a bunch of books on, psychology and business, sometimes Maslow, sometimes Frankel's, et cetera. And in this case, I just thought about what are the motivations of these hosts. And so I spent a lot of time understanding why people become Airbnb hosts. Because if I could understand what it was that led them to doing this, it would be easier for me to understand how I could influence them to want to create a great hospitality experience. So I used psychology, and then it was a variety of things. It was the carrot and the stick. The carrot being, how do we take this dormant program called Superhost, which had only 200 of them around the globe, and they hadn't added one in 2 years, and they were about to sunset the program. How do we take Superhost and like rev it up so that now there's 800,000 Superhosts in the world? And how do we get clear about what are the 5 qualities we look for from a Superhost? If you don't have all 5 and from your scores, then it's a problem. And then that was the carrot. And then the stick was like, okay, someone's not doing a good job. We can see it over and over again. How do we remove them from the platform or force them to actually do a little bit of education, which we could do education if it was a remedial case. So long story short is it was the fact that 70% of our hosts and guests review each other Whereas in a normal hotel, maybe 2% of our hotel guests actually fill out an online survey. We had a feedback mechanism that allowed us to make changes quickly and to be able to get very clear. Imagine if you had a hotel where people, the check-in process and the housekeeping process, in real time, you're getting feedback about whether someone's doing a great job at the front desk or not. You don't have that. We don't have real-time feedback like that. We have, a survey at the end, but we were able to look at all that and then look at what trend lines were for hosts and then help them get better at what they did. And then I understood that for a lot of hosts, this is an entrepreneurial venture. So I needed to speak to them as a fellow entrepreneur and a fellow hospitality entrepreneur. And so I was lucky. I really became beloved in the Airbnb host community because the fact that this was a hotelier helping them learn how to do things better was like gave Airbnb a halo. And we ended up creating something called the Airbnb Open, which we did. 1,500 hosts from around the world from 40 countries came to San Francisco. And then the next year we did it in Paris. And we had 6,500 hosts from 110 countries. And then the third year we did it in LA, and we had 20,000 hosts from over 110 countries come for a 3-day festival of learning and experiencing and sharing stories. Because, what I found was that a lot of the Airbnb host experience could be shared with each other. So the wisdom could be shared and people could actually share best practices. So that's a long-winded answer. Someday I might write a book on this topic because it was a fascinating journey to see, like, I'm taking over the hospitality component of a tech company that doesn't have great scores for its hosts, and we're going to grow very fast, and I'm supposed to actually make it better. And so growing fast makes it usually worse. But in fact, we did grow really fast, and ultimately our net promoter scores, or NPS scores, grew to 50% higher than the hotel industry. And I think it's only because we tapped into the entrepreneurial instincts of our hosts and use psychology to do that.
To the psychology piece, I really encourage all of our listeners to read Peak. I remember when it came out in 2007, I read it. There's applications across any business, certainly in hospitality
For sure.
is key. But I think just to underscore the other point you made around community, I remember talking to a number of folks that were working on your community teams during that time and how passionate they were about connecting people and bringing them together.
Yeah.
They were obsessed with this. And it really stood out to me working more with traditional hotels at the time, how this was such a big unlock. And the results, as you mentioned, speak from themselves from an NPS score from becoming the most valuable hospitality company.
Yeah, the community was really critical. And one of the things I did a month after I joined is we did an offsite with the founders and the top leaders. It was only a small group of us, maybe about 10 of us. And we did an exercise that Peter Drucker suggests, which is, what business are we in? Because he says Peter Drucker, the management theorist, says that's the most important question we need to ask ourselves as a leader. What business are we in? So we did an exercise where, imagine Brian Chesky and I sitting across from each other, and I would ask Brian, what business are we in? And Brian would say, well, we're in the home sharing business. And I'd say, thank you, Brian. Let me ask you again. And this time you can't answer the same way twice. What business are we in? So he would say, like, well, we're in the business of turning strangers into friends. Okay, Brian, thank you. So we did that exercise with pairing off in one-on-one with people, and we asked the question 5 times. By the end of that exercise, we came to realize that as a company, we were in the belong anywhere business. We were not in the home sharing business. We were in the business of belonging anywhere. And so the community, what you saw from our community team and what you saw from my host team and the hospitality team, was the idea of how do we infuse belong anywhere into everything we do, including our advertising and our promotions and and our operating strategy, of course. So I'm proud of that because that was really influenced by something I did a month after I joined.
I would love to shift our conversation a little bit to talking about learning to love midlife. I've really enjoyed reading this book. I've enjoyed how you got it right there.
There it is.
Fantastic. I'll link in the show notes where people can get their copy.
Yeah.
Really encourage people to read this because there are principles that can be applied across how you live and you work. And you've talked about those in a number of appearances I'll link to as well. But I wonder maybe if we focus our conversation on the intersection of hospitality and hospitality providers that are listening to this and some of the areas this might be most applicable. I think maybe to kick us off, if we could,
Yeah.
one of the things that you talk about is this notion of kind of rest or recreation, or you call it recreation or regeneration.
Yeah.
And it feels this is both very important for individuals, but even for hospitality providers. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this rest or recreation distinction or these concepts and what comes to mind for you on this.
Being in the hospitality business is not unless you're purely doing events. If you're doing events, then it's a 100-yard dash. But if you're in the hospitality business, restaurants, spas, hotels, providing services, it is a marathon. So it is easy to get burned out over time. It's also easy to get burned out doing a 100-yard dash. But usually when you're doing an event, you're doing your event and then you have downtime. Whereas, if you operate as if it's a 100-yard dash, but you're running a marathon, it won't go very well for you. And so I have long believed that sabbaticals were valuable. Back in the day when I was running Joie de Vivre, we had a very novel thing where if you're a salaried employee, after 3 years of employment, full-time, you got a 1-month paid sabbatical. Now that was pretty wild back then, a long time ago. But what it did was it helped people to refuel themselves. And we're in a very empathetic business, and being able to be in a space where you didn't have to be taking care of people for a month was very valuable. It also allowed your brain, the recreation, how do you recreate your brain? How do you spend some time looking at things from a different perspective? So yeah, I'm a big believer in that in any industry, but I think hospitality is probably where it's most needed. And so what does that mean? It means, how do you put your phone away? How do you create boundaries? How do you know that, every, once a quarter, maybe you do a three-day weekend, and you're offline for 3 days, and you have you have a message saying, I'm not available this weekend. And I think those things are essential, and it's easy to get caught up in the 24/7, nature of hospitality and to get burned out quickly.
Those boundaries are critical. Let's talk a little bit more about health. You mentioned earlier there's, opportunities, interesting things happening in longevity travel. I'm interested in what you think hospitality providers might be able to do to support people on their journey to building long-term health.
Well, I think, there's the obvious things, which are like, do you have a gym and how good is your gym? And, do you have a walking or a running map at your hotel that allows people to know where to go, and, and staff favorites of like things to see along the way? I mean, I think that's huge. I think in certain environments, having bikes that you can rent or take out while you're there is, certainly valuable. But I think a lot of it comes down to also diet and sleep. So there's, when it comes to, there's personal wellness and there's social wellness. On the personal wellness side, everything I just talked about was really exercise. But then there's sleep and there's diet. And, gosh, when it comes to sleep hygiene, that there's so many variables there and so many ways that hotels can do a better job of addressing that, whether it's having white noise machines available for people. The good news is you don't need a lot of the gadgets anymore, because a lot of the gadgets are on people's phones. And but sleep, sleep's the most essential. It's like it's the base of the Maslow pyramid. If someone's not having a good night's sleep, then the rest, it doesn't matter what you're doing up higher up on the pyramid. That's essential. And then the diet, having a variety of food options, if not on the premises, within close proximity, that's pretty essential too. But I think the thing that's missed a lot when it comes to wellness in the hospitality industry is not just the personal wellness side, but the social wellness side. How do I feel as a result of making this trip more connected? How do I have that belong anywhere experience? How do I go to MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, or the Midlife Wisdom School, and feel so deeply connected to the 24 people I'm in my workshop with, such that these are my new best friends? How do I go to a boutique hotel in a neighborhood, and I'm hanging out in the bar, and I'm really feeling the local flavor, and I'm getting to talk to somebody who lives nearby? I mean, generally speaking, most hotels, especially convention hotels, feel like fortresses, very cut off from the local community. And I'm not saying that's, I mean, it's hard to, how do you do it differently? The ones who can figure it out are going to do it successfully, because I don't think people necessarily want to be so cut off from that local community and from that heartbeat of the city. Part of the reason that Airbnb does so well, there are really two reasons that, and it varied from year to year, what was the first choice versus second choice. A lot of people chose Airbnb because it was more space, less money, meaning an apartment for less money. That's the obvious one. But the one that was less obvious and sometimes was the first choice of why people actually used Airbnb was because they wanted to live like a local. And that's become sort of like language that all the hotel industry tries to talk about right now. But back in the day when we discovered that live like a local was really the language that people were using in our focus groups, and we were able to help people do that because you're in a community, in a neighborhood where there's neighborhood restaurants, then it really meant we needed to help our hosts look at how are they helping people to feel like a local by being there. Boutique hotels, I think, do this well, especially if they have a restaurant or bar that is popular with people outside just the hotel guests. And they're usually maybe in locations in the city that are not segregated like in a convention or downtown market. But I think that social wellness piece, which is, I think, as important as the personal wellness piece, is something that hotels need to think about as well.
I appreciate you touching on social wellness because there's all the opportunities we have within the hospitality business that you outlined, but there's definitely equivalent opportunities on a personal level. In the book, you share research where I think it was half of our social network on average tends to get replaced every 7 years.
Yeah.
So building friendships and relationships needs to be a constant thing. It's not just we built these friendships when we were this age or stage and then we ride that. It needs to be a constant thing. You also say that in general, men don't do a great job with this, connecting as well as other women. And I'm curious, I mean, maybe just to make this personal, like what are some things that we can do? What can I do to kind of get rid of this notion of going it along and getting better at developing friendships?
Yeah, it's a couple things. Women, when they're girls, learn to be more vulnerable and to tell secrets and talk about things that, that sometimes feel very sensitive. Men, boys don't learn that as much. But also as we move into our 20s, 30s, and 40s, men put on the blinders a little bit more. Women have to do it too. I mean, both men and women have very full schedules. And actually, frankly, women have more roles and identities that they're trying to satisfy than men do. But a lot of men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s let their friendships atrophy. You had your friends from college or maybe from graduate school or maybe from high school, and you sort of lost track with them. And then you didn't necessarily bring in the new breed of people who are going to be your friends, and except for maybe at work. And then at work, it was sort of like, oh, well, let's go for a drink after work. And that was fine. But sometimes that was like, okay, well, I can't really talk about what's going on for me with workmates when it comes to my home life or my spiritual life or my, the fact I want to change my job. I mean, we end up in a place where we feel pretty disconnected. And, part of the reason why we have a loneliness epidemic is because we used to have a social structure in society with the Kiwanis Club or the PTA or our church. And there was these social infrastructure that brought us together with people on a regular basis. And those kinds of programs, those kinds of social infrastructure have faded to some degree. It doesn't mean that they're not still around. It's just they're not as powerful as they used to be. And we are online more, and therefore we aren't having in-person gatherings as much. And for all those reasons, you can actually feel quite socially isolated, even post-COVID. And I think COVID got us sort of comfortable hanging out in our home alone. And so this is a big deal. The number one variable for someone who's living a happy and healthy life in their 80s and 90s, the number one variable is how invested they were in their social relationships in their 50s. So this is not something you should put off till you're 80. And it's something you should start investing back in your 30s and 40s. And by your 50s, if you're not invested in trying to keep friendships and really realizing that friendships are a practice you have to work at, then you may have atrophy in that muscle. And if that's the case, you don't know how to actually fix it. And this is one of the things we specialize in at MEA, is the social wellness piece.
I'd like to transition to talking to MEA, which is pretty easy because I feel like there are so many great concepts from Learning to Love Midlife that it seems you have built into MEA. So I can just two kind of things maybe we could use as a bridge into talking about MEA. I think there's one of them is you talk about this notion of I am who I serve. It's about impact. It's about driving change. And you also talk about this notion of being a conduit versus I think you mentioned like a can do it.
Yeah.
And in kind of your work with Christine and Jeff in launching MEA, I wonder, maybe we make this personal, for you, Chip. What has kind of those two notions looked like in practice as you have thought about and then launched MEA, and then now you're in the process of expanding MEA?
Back to the conduit thing. So there's a chapter in the book where I talk about the hero's journey, which is a part of our program. And I was talking about my own experience with it. And when I was CEO of Joie de Vivre, I gave away 3,500 copies of The Little Engine That Could at Christmas time one year, because I love that book. It's I think I can, the little train that's pressed into service to take the animals over the hill. And can do attitude was the number one variable for loyalty for our customers. So how we scored on can do attitude was really important. So this book felt important to me. But what I realize now is that book was a manifestation of how I saw myself. I think I can. And I love that. And it also meant that I had a tendency in my life, and I still do, to try to be the hero who feels like they can do anything. And often that means I don't empower other people. It means I'm running ahead. There's a famous African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I'm good at fast going alone. It doesn't mean I don't work with other people. I do. It just means I tend to be like 5 steps ahead, not because I'm smart, but because I'm just sort of resilient and obsessive. And so what that meant for me was I realized, I end up in this cycle where I become the can-do-it hero, and then I feel like I'm doing it alone, and then it leads to resentment. And that's happened with me and my co-founders, Jeff and Christine, on multiple occasions. We get along great, but yes, I can see the pattern. Being able to see the pattern of your life is something you get better at in midlife. And that's a form of wisdom. And so what I had to really realize is, like, one of the things I'm really good at is being the conduit, not just the can-do-it. I am pretty good at being able to see things and imagine creative ideas and have them come through me. But I'm not able to do that very well when I'm so stretched and when I'm so busy and when I'm being the can-do-it hero. So what I've tried to do is shift so that I have enough really capable people around me so that I can be the popcorn machine saying, oh, here's a new idea. Here's a new idea. Here's a new idea. I can come up with the ideas and then let other people run with them, and then really empower them to take the idea and make it their own going forward. That's a shift in my leadership style that's still in process. I can't say I'm perfect at this yet. I'll never be perfect, but I will. I'm certainly more cognizant of the fact that learning how to be the populator of ideas and then let other people take those ideas and help me support them in that, how I serve them in being a servant leader, is a big part of how I see my role today.
So there's a mindset there, but there's also an enabling factor that you talk about in the book of time affluence. So I encourage people to read about your thinking there, because it seems like you need both of those factors to operate in this way.
Yes.
And I'll link in the show notes where people can learn more about MEA if they're unfamiliar with it. But I wonder if you could maybe tell me about the MEA ranch opening in New Mexico in just a few months. I understand.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you do there that you're most excited about. Because I had a listener ask me before this, they were curious what you would have done differently if you were starting all over. But maybe let's talk about the new MEA ranch, if that sounds good, and what you're
Yeah.
excited about the design of that.
Well, let me answer that question first. If I would to do it all over again, the first campus of MEA was basically emerged out of me running on the beach and having this idea like we should have a midlife wisdom school and I have a home on the beach. So it's like, and it was a very rural part of Mexico. So it's like, oh, let's just build around ourselves. If I could do it over again, I probably would have said like, well, let's do this in the US first. And let's figure out and create proof of concept in the US. And Santa Fe might have been my first choice in the U.S. And so the fact that our second campus and the first one in the U.S. is in Santa Fe is not a surprise. And we chose Santa Fe for a lot of reasons. We don't want to be a commuter school. So when I say we're a school, what does that mean? You come and you spend a 5-night program, usually around one of 3 or 4 key themes. That's cultivating purpose, navigating transitions, owning wisdom, and figuring out what is your wisdom and how are you gifting that to the world, and then how do you reframe your relationship with aging as well. So all of that is part of it, and the longevity travel piece is part of that too. Is how do you consciously curate your life so you're going to live a lot longer. So in so doing, Santa Fe felt good because I didn't want us to be like in Ojai for LA or Sonoma for San Francisco or Hudson Valley for New York, because if you don't change your habitat, it's hard to change your habits. And so we want people to come to a place that feels like they're making a pilgrimage to come to it. And Santa Fe is that kind of place. It's not on the beaten path. And when you get there, it feels very foreign. Am I in the United States? Like New Mexico feels very foreign, and Santa Fe in particular, and has a lot of history. It's also a place that has a long history of, artists and creators and people seeking to come to. And so for all those reasons, we decided to sort of set up shop in the US there. And we have 3 pieces of property there. One is this 2,600 acre ranch, which opens in April with 2 retreat centers. A second one is on Museum Hill next to St. John's College, 12.5 acre Catholic seminary and retreat center that is a historic property. And then the third property is where we're going to do a residential community in town. And so long story short is I'm very excited about this because there's all these horses. So we have modern elder horses. We have horses that are sort of retirement age, that were performance horses that are actually going to be there and you're going to be able to do equine assisted learning, horseback riding. And there's, with 4 square miles of land, we have so many hiking trails and biking trails, and just being in nature in New Mexico is quite beautiful. So yeah, it's a big deal. I'm proud of the fact that we are as ambitious as we are, because I do believe that the category of midlife wisdom schools, which sort of fall under the banner of transformational travel and maybe even wellness travel, I think we're a category that is going to be growing over the next 10 years. And I'm someone who looks for categories. I'm a zeitgeist surfer. I was at one of the first boutique hoteliers. I joined Airbnb when nobody had heard of them. So I do believe that I have some ability to like see something on the horizon and then make it work. This is the most complicated of those 3, I will say though. Boutique hotels were easier to do, and Airbnb was not easy. But I'd say creating something that is a combination school, the school piece actually adds some complexity because, you have a curriculum. So we're not just a hospitality experience. We're a transformational educational experience. And I love that. And we do it really well. And it makes it a little bit more complicated.
I want to hear more about the educational piece, but just the horses sound amazing. And I remember you talking about, I think you had an 87-year-old guest at your Baja property that started surfing for the first time.
Yes,
and
Jim.
Kind of talking with people who have gone through the program and, reading your website, it really stands out how many activities and experiential ways that you're allowing people to try new things that maybe they thought they couldn't.
Experiential travel and experiential education are essential because, no one wants to be in a classroom, like just like having, PowerPoints feeding themselves. So we don't do any of that. It's all based upon the idea of creating a crucible for life-changing conversations and for experiences that allow you to become a beginner again. Because that is one of the most important variables for people who live long, healthy lives, is being curious and open to new experiences. And so, yes, the program is quite unusual for a retreat center program in the sense of how experiential it is. And in Baja, of course, surfing will be one of the experiential activities, whereas in Santa Fe, horseback riding or equine assisted learning is one of them. But there's multiple things that we do in both locations.
It's very connected to the sense of place. And my last question around MEA is just around that educational component you touched on. If I go through the website, kind of learning about this, you have such an incredible diversity of world-class teachers of
Yeah.
all different backgrounds and persuasions. How do you think about programming that mix of people?
Well, I think about who are the people I'd like to learn from, and whether that's Esther Perel or Dan Buettner from Blue Zones or Michael Franti, the musician. Yeah, and so we invite them, and Richard Rohr, who's teaching for us in a famous Christian mystic. Um, so we'll start with that. It's like, who are some really interesting people, but we have a core program that's unrelated to who the faculty is. And we have, 16 different facilitators who have been trained in that. And those folks are deeply embedded in the idea of evolving our curriculum to help people in midlife to reimagine and repurpose themselves. And so we work quite closely with Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and UC Berkeley with professors from those places as well. So yeah, it is a combination. We didn't want to do sort of one size fits all, where there's some retreat centers where they have one program and you go and you do that one program. It's like, oh, okay, I did it. Great. We wanted to have something that would encourage people to come once or even twice a year. And it's not an inexpensive program, even though we do have financial aid. And so for someone to come twice a year and to two different programs and spend, it's $6,000 single for a 5-night experience. That's $12,000 a year. That's a lot of money for someone to spend with us. But we have dozens, maybe even hundreds of people who fit that profile, who actually come more than once a year. And then we also have online programs too, because during COVID, that was a necessity. And then we also have regenerative residential communities in Baja and soon in Santa Fe.
Very exciting. I'll include links in the show notes so people can learn more, encourage
Yeah.
people to check it out. Chip, before we go, I'm wondering kind of what maybe a practical thing we can leave with people. Some things that stood out for me for reading the book were kind of your wisdom journal that you had created,
Yeah.
and also this notion of awe walks. I don't know if you want to speak to either of those or anything else on your mind. What's a practice that we might use to kind of live out some of the principles that you write about?
Let's do both of them briefly. Awak is really simple. It's, we need more awe in our life, AWE. And often we find that awe in nature. And so one of the things that I like to do is I do something called spying on the divine. And I take my dog Jamie out and we go for a long walk in places that I've never walked before. And I like to go from a place of like a childhood sense of awe, like, what am I going to see? And the question I like to ask before we go on those walks is, nature, what do you have to teach me today? So that's an awe walk helps to, it's one of those rejuvenating activities we talked about earlier. And then the idea of the wisdom journal came to me when I was 28. At that point, I'd been running my company for 2 years, Joie de Vivre, and I was an idiot. I mean, 28-year-old CEO of a boutique hotel company, what did I know? And then we had the Loma Prieta earthquake here in San Francisco. And bottom line was like, there was no hotel business for 6 months. And I was running out of cash. And so one day on a Friday, I came home and I took an old journal and I wrote on the cover of the journal my wisdom book. And I started a practice whereby each weekend I would sit down and make a list of bullet points of what I'd learned that week, to sometimes just to make myself feel better. Like, okay, that was a painful lesson I just learned. How is it going to serve me in the future? And every weekend I would have this practice. It might be 4 or 6 or 8 bullet points of what I learned that week, along with how it will serve me. And so I've been doing that for 35 years. Now I don't do it every weekend anymore, but I do it frequently. And it's really helpful because the process of actually metabolizing your experience is the way you build your wisdom. Now, what I've learned also, last thought, is you could do this with teams. Once a quarter, you can sit down with your leadership team and say, okay, next week's team meeting, leadership team meeting, each person is going to come to the meeting and say, hey, here's my biggest lesson of the quarter. Here's how it's going to serve me in the future. And everybody shares that. Maybe there's 8 or 10 of you to share that. And then as a group, you say, what was our biggest team lesson for the quarter? What did we learn as a team? And how's it going to serve us? And that is one of the wisdom management practices that we offer at MEA, because we have groups who come to MEA, private groups, everybody from YPO to companies who want to come and learn, like, how can we be a wiser company? How can we create wiser leaders? So that's an example of one of those practices.
I love it. Chip, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.